inviting me to be with you today. Amy gave a good segue for me to start out by using the example of the twins, Peter and Paul. Because Mission Dolores, the first Mass in San Francisco, is on June 29th, which is the feast day of Peter and Paul. And our two twins that are California are, of course, Junipero Serra and his student who ends up being his biographer, Fray Francisco Palo. Both of them come from Majorca, Spain, to this part of the world. They minister in Mexico, and then they both come up to California. Palo was our actually first permanent resident padre at Mission Dolores, and it is he who writes the biography of Junipero Serra after Serra dies, because he wanted to put down for the people of Majorca specifically what the great son of Majorca had done in this new world that they had come to. And so in San Francisco, as throughout California, at the 9 Serra missions, and Maggie, you're correct, there are 10. Often people just record history at the border, but we know that Junipero Serra established one mission in Baja before he comes north into Upper or Alta California. And so we have the 9 missions that are now part of the state of California, part of the United States of America. And that's how we proclaim Junipero Serra to be among the founding fathers of the United States, because he established California, our golden state, that his influence is upon us. I haven't heard anything yet. You know, we've suffered the removal of statues and plaques. I haven't seen anything yet where somebody wants to take the map of California and change all the Christian saint names that Serra painted. Sometimes I've heard he painted a scroll for Christ on the map of California. It's a litany of saints from San Diego almost to the Oregon border. And what a difficulty that would be if people come up with a movement to change all those names. So we begin with Junipero Serra coming across the border from Baja or Old California, Viejo California, into Nuevo California. Those are the terms he knew, Old California and New California during his time. Some people ask, why is July 1st his feast day and not August 28th, the day he died? Well, August 28th, when we were in Rome, at the time before his beatification, when we were participating in the vote for the miracle of Sister Mary Boniface Drida, Franciscan sister, who was cured through the intercession of Junipero Serra in 1960, the Congregation of Saints asked, what would be a good day for his feast day? And because everybody kind of shook their heads and said, no, you're not getting August 28th. We're not bumping St. Augustine. So we went back to historical notes, and it became very quickly, very clearly, what would be a perfect day for Junipero Serra's feast day. The day he enters Upper California, July the 1st. And that's why his feast day is July the 1st. That's the day that he steps across the border. I like to say that's the day he steps across the border as the first undocumented illegal alien coming into this country. So he very much is a patron saint of all Californians, and as he is a patron saint for all of us. So his life and ministry is one of bringing people to the faith. He's a student of John Duns Scotus, and that understanding of philosophy and theology is that all creation is innocent and pure, and Junipero Serra's journey is to get to a place that he called, and many of his time contemporaries called it, the forest, which means getting to a place that they're entering the Garden of Eden, because the gospel has never been brought there. And that's why on July the 1st, it's documented that when they get to what the soldiers and the padres knew as the border between Upper and Lower California, Junipero Serra inquires, am I now in Upper California? And basically he gets off his donkey, gets down and kisses the ground, because this is his lifelong journey, his lifelong dream to bring the gospel to a place, to a people who had never heard it proclaimed before. And so the ministry of that same moment continues in all of our churches in California, especially our missions, is proclaiming the gospel that Amy so beautifully put together as told through the various churches in Rome that many of us, I've had the opportunity many times to visit most of those places. And it was wonderful, Amy, to see all the artwork and to have you bring in the historical documentation as well as the scriptures. And as we visit our California missions, we also bring in the scriptures. We bring in, as we bring people in, because the major thing that Junipero Serra was doing was he was baptizing native peoples into the Christian faith. Now, as we know, before, when was it? Before 1910, 11, when Pope Pius X changed the order of the sacraments of initiation, it was baptism, then confirmation, then Eucharist, and then it got changed that he put Eucharist in the middle for the young children to receive. If you look to the historical records of our California mission, after baptism, what is the biggest sacramental push that Junipero Serra is doing? And that is to get to every single mission to confirm the indigenous peoples. He had received the permission from the congregation in Rome, because he was in missionary country and there were no bishops here, that he could administer the sacrament of confirmation. And what he was doing was he was preparing the native peoples to be in full communion for the moment when he was given permission to bring the Eucharist and to distribute Eucharist to the native peoples. My ancestors were at these missions. And so I see Junipero Serra as the person who brought the gospel into our land, and specifically brought the gospel and the message of Christ to my family, both at Mission Dolores and at Mission San Jose, which is on the East Bay. My favorite spots are to sit near the baptismal fonts, because I know, I can stand on the front doors of these buildings and I can talk about colonialism and the horrible things that happen to people when one country invades another country. But then I can swing the doors open to either one of those mission churches. I can walk people down the aisle to where the baptismal fonts are, and I can say, here is where my ancestors first became Christians. Now, I know there are many immigrant people in the state of California and where your other folks may be in your home states that immigrated from other countries. And there's often an exciting trip if a family returns to Ireland or to Italy or some other country and says, here's where my ancestors were married the day before they got on the boat, before they went across the ocean to get to Ellis Island, and then they come to San Francisco. I don't have to go anywhere. All I got to do is walk down the street, and I'm right there where my ancestors became Christians. And it's in the record books. And so for many people, that's why I say, if you can't do the touchstone journey, just as St. Francis did with his visual aids, the Christmas crèche and with the Stations of the Cross, Francis set up all those imageries and all those spiritual events so that people who could not make the journey to the Holy Land to go to Bethlehem, or who could not get to Jerusalem, who could not get to Calvary, through the worship service, by looking and meditating and adoring at a Christmas scene, or by practicing the spiritual practice of the Stations of the Cross, he found a way for the people to understand those things that people were making long journey pilgrimages on. He brought the pilgrimage home. And so there are many ways, if people go on a pilgrimage to a California mission, they can see what the Franciscan friars, who are rooted in the Christian tradition, were doing, trying to bring the native peoples to those holy places in Jerusalem, in Bethlehem. It's the same thing. It's that same message that every Christian follower hears, that we know we hear Jesus says to the apostles, that St. Francis of Assisi says to his disciples, that Junipero Serra said to his missionaries, go and baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So when we come to our missions, they become places, spiritual places, where a pilgrimage can be made, And especially you see me framed right there with the interior of Mission Dolores, which Amy's coming tomorrow to take our visual tour of. And all the statues are there. They were the visual aids that the Padres used to teach my ancestors the Christian faith. And pretty much because there weren't books, there weren't PowerPoint presentations, there wasn't any internet 250 years ago, but there was the art, the paintings, and the statues. And here's one thing about our California artwork and our missions. Many of the missions, the artwork is 200 or 300 years older than the actual building. Reason being is this, and I'll give you the exclusion that's San Francisco. San Francisco, we have no artwork that is older than our building. And that reason is, Junipero Serra said, this mission is dedicated to our founder of the order, St. Francis of Assisi. So only new stuff came to San Francisco. But at the other missions, as churches in Mexico 250 years ago or a little later were getting new church altar vestments for the priest, they were getting new books, or they were getting new statues. They would do like perhaps you and I would do as we pack up our used clothes, our old books, and send off to the Goodwill, to St. Vincent de Paul Society. So from Mexico, they would pack up the old statues, the old vestments, the older chalices, and send them up to the mission country. And so the antiquity of many of our artifacts in our California missions are older than the missions themselves, except for St. Francisco, because Father Serra said only new stuff for St. Francis. So there's a tradition in using the art, as Amy just so beautifully showed us, and expressing our faith and teaching our religion. Because I often think of my ancestors looking at the various statues and one or two padres trying to explain the Blessed Trinity. We have a painting there at Mission Dolores that has Jesus as a triplet. There's one in Santa Clara Mission too on the ceiling of Old Mission Santa Clara, that there's Jesus in a red robe, or a figure in a red robe. That's supposed to be the Holy Spirit. Then there's one in blue, and that's Jesus. Then one in white, and that's God. But if you look at the faces, it's Jesus as a triplet. Imagine if you're a native person, a California Indian who came into a mission, who had your own religious system before, you're trying to figure this out, and somebody's explaining to you the Trinity using one of these paintings. Sometimes I just figure, I'm sure one of my ancestors must have asked the padre, could you explain that again? And then, you know, there's a statue. Every Franciscan mission, pretty much you can tell it's a Franciscan mission if there's a statue of the Immaculate Conception in it. Because the Franciscan friars, until 1854, when Pope Pius IX declared the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, the Franciscans took a special promise to promulgate the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. So we know a Franciscan church because when you look at the main altar, you're going to see a statue of the Immaculata. So when you look at our California missions, and some people go, why is that mission down there by Solvang called La Purísima Concepción, the most precious or the most pure conception? Because the dogma of the Immaculate Conception had not yet been promulgated when Mission La Purísima is set up. So there's also a play on words that the friars were trying to keep it in play, but they didn't want to violate the rules of the time. So by studying and visiting and praying at our California missions, especially through our art and through the different traditions that continued there, if you come to Mission Dolores and if you go to many of our California missions, you won't find any Stations of the Cross hanging on the walls inside the churches, because that was a Franciscan tradition that the Stations of the Cross were the way, the road to Calvary, and generally they're outside in a place where people can walk a distance from each station to the next station. And so we see these traditions, the Franciscan traditions, continued in our California missions. And then, yes, there becomes the big situation where people can talk about the conversion of native peoples. How did the Indians come into the missions? What were the techniques that the friars used? And the friars always said, Their first method for converting Indians was friendship, to reach out, the exchange of gifts. There was one slide there, can't remember which church it was, Amy, where you had them bringing gifts. Remember the two people?
The Magi bringing gifts.
Yeah, the Magi were bringing gifts. And the Padres shared that they brought gifts. And in the same time, the Padres then write down, and the native peoples reciprocated. It was then, once they were gift giving, that then they could exchange the faith. And so there's much into this sense of what we call hospitality. Well, most of our native peoples either have been converted or not converted to this day, but at each one of our missions up and down the state, which means then through all our churches up and down the state, the ministry needs to continue following that example of the Franciscan friars of reaching out and sharing gifts. And the response of my ancestors and other native peoples was to reciprocate with gifts, because we have that in the documentation that the Indians would be bringing food and all these other necessary things as the early missions were setting up for the military and for the soldiers for survival. And then we continue our story. The challenge today in the state of California is the same challenge Junipero Serra had 2 centuries ago. How do I bring the Christian message to people? How do we get people inside our church buildings? How do we minister to them? And eventually is by bringing the gospel, how do we get them to heaven? And I think that's pretty much the Serra I like to present. And I know I think I have a few minutes left before we have to stop, but I like to tell a story to kind of, in a childlike way, not childish, but childlike, present Junipero Serra. So I would ask, because we're talking art, any of you who have your favorite church that has stained glass windows. Okay. For me, I'm going to bring it home. In the city of San Francisco, there's the church we call Notre Dame des Victoires. It's the French National Church, and it has beautiful stained glass windows. And it's just up from the shopping district, okay? It's just up from Union Square. And I often imagine that perhaps during the shopping season at Christmas time, there's a young mother and maybe she's got 1 or 2 toddlers with her. One of them perhaps is 5 or 6 years old, ready to go to kindergarten or the 1st grade. But mom is exhausted because she's carrying packages and she also has these children with her. She sees the church door, as many of us do. I do this every time I'm in Rome, and if it's hot as can be, I duck into one of all the churches just to cool down. But this mother says, well, I'll take the kids in here, we'll get a break, I'll sit them down the bench, and I'll say a few prayers. Well, the mother does that, but let's say little 6-year-old Johnny is very inquisitive, and he starts tugging at mommy, who's there at the communion rail trying to say her prayers. And Johnny's looking at the stained glass windows. And he's going, ooh, who's that? Which one's that? And mommy's looking because the window's in green, and she goes, oh, that's St. Patrick. And then this goes on, in red over there, that's St. George. On and on with the various windows and the various colors, till the mother realizes she's not going to get her prayer time in. And she stands up and starts walking out. And they look at the blue window over the main entrance, which is our Blessed Mother's window. Well, move forward a week or 2 later after Christmas break and the shopping season's over. Now Johnny's back in his classroom. And at this Catholic school, the sister, the nun who's teaching, decides in the catechism lesson today, we're going to talk about saints. And you know how the teachers will ask a question and they don't expect anybody to answer it. They just throw the question out there. And sister says, children, today we're going to talk about saints. And can anybody tell me what's a saint? To which she did not expect anyone to answer. And there's little Johnny flagging her down. Oh, sister, I know the answer. I know the answer. Well, sister in frustration, because this was not in her script for the class that day, she says, okay, Johnny, why don't you tell us and all the class what's a saint? And Johnny says, oh, sister, that's so easy. My mommy told me what's a saint. Yes, Johnny, what's a saint? Sister, a saint is someone who lets the sun shine through. And in California, we have a golden state where the sun shines, and Junipero Serra is our patron who lets the sun shine through.
Well, Thank you so much, Andy.